You have every honor that a man could have. You've got
Almost.
Oscars.
No.
No Oscar?
No Oscars. I got the Irving
Then why are
Thalberg
they giving
Award.
you this award then if you don't have an Oscar?
I don't have anything. I don't really have a lot of awards, to be very honest with you. I have the Irving Thalberg Award, and you know, and I get a lot of little awards.
Yeah.
I've got 2 Emmys, but I've never had an Academy Award. I've been nominated, but I've never won. I'm too popular for that.
Too popular. Meaning what?
They don't give Academy Awards to popular films.
Are you proud of the fact that you make films that people want to go see?
Yeah.
So
I believe
popular's okay with you.
popular is okay with me. I think it's a very important part of society. And if you're making a work of art or a film or whatever and nobody sees it, I don't see where it does anybody any good.
I tell you who thinks it does do people good is Francis. I mean,
Yes.
Francis is making movies that satisfy one person.
That's right.
Him.
But I'm not sure with society at large it's helping much. You know, and of course that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to make movies that only I want to see and I want to do. I've always wanted to do that. I fell into popular movies by accident. I always disliked Hollywood theatrical movies. I didn't want anything to do with them. So,
But you simply knew how to make them.
no, I mean, I guess it was embedded in my DNA. It's that particular thing, which is, I'm not sure whether it's a coincidence that some people like Steven and I grew up in the same environment.
Steven Spielberg.
Steven Spielberg. You know, we liked the movies. Same thing with Marty. There's a whole generation right there that came of age in the 60s that grew up on movies. I didn't really grow up on movies, but it was a part of my life in terms of, it wasn't, you know, I came up at the beginning of television, and the whole idea of visual storytelling and that sort of thing was at the right moment. I got in there, and what I wanted to do, and what a lot of the people wanted to do, was simply make films that people liked and enlightened them, entertained them. And that's what we were in the business for. We liked movies.
But the irony of this is that you are considered one of the most innovative filmmakers ever in the history of cinema.
But the innovation part is because I hate to say the word artist, but I will say the word artist. They, for thousands of years, were also the scientists, the engineers, and the artists. Because in order to accomplish certain works, especially in architecture, you had to figure out how to accomplish it because, you know, I mean, they sat with the Duomo in Florence for hundreds of years because they couldn't figure out how to put the dome on it. And Brunelleschi, who did it, went and studied the Pantheon and other places where they had big domes, because they used to do it in Rome. But by the time they got the Renaissance, it was after the Dark Ages, and nobody knew how to do that stuff anymore. So he had to actually invent the ratcheting pulley in order to be able to get oxen to pull bricks up that high.
So that's what you have done. You have been able to create new things simply because no one had done it before and you had to do it on your own.
Because I had a story to tell.
Yeah.
There's a gap between what is possible and where my vision is, and I've had to fill that gap, which is what anybody does. You don't invent technology and then figure out what to do with it. You come up with an artistic problem, and then you have to invent the technology in order to accomplish it. So it's the opposite of what most people think it is, and any artist will tell you that. And art, on all levels, is just technology, which is why it's, you know, people say, well, monkeys can do paintings. Well, they can't really. They can do scribbling, they can do like what my 2-year-old does, but if you want to say, I want to convey an emotion to another human being, that's something only human beings can do. Animals can do it by roaring in your face or biting your hand off, and that usually has an effect. But to do it in a painting, to do it in a play or in a story, in poetry, or anything that's in the arts, you have to be a human being.
So we've talked about artist, filmmaker, innovator, director, storyteller.
Well, a director is just somebody who's got a fetish with making the world to be the way he wants it to be. Sort of narcissistic.
That's you?
All directors. They're no different.
And you're a director.
All directors are, they're vaguely like emperors, which is, I want to build the society to reflect me and what I want. And the great thing about, you don't have to kill a lot of people and build a lot of stuff and spend a lot of money if you're a king and want to do that. It's good for society, obviously. But a director can do it with a lot less money and just say, I'm going to create a world where people can fly.
So what does Star Wars and Indiana Jones say about the world you want to create?
Well, Star Wars and Indiana Jones were basically put together, especially Star Wars, more than Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones was just done for fun, to entertain people. And there were some messages in there about, archaeology and also about what we believe in terms of myths and that sort of thing. But the real one is Star Wars, and that was done in the same vein that what I was saying about the patron creates the propaganda, and what I wanted to do was go back to some of the older propaganda, which was consistent through all of the societies, which is mythology, but to say, what did they all believe? Because they were all, this propaganda was created independently.
Yeah.
And what are the things that they all actually believed? We're talking relationships with your father, relationships with your society, your history, relationships with the gods. All of this stuff it's old, but they're psychological motifs that were created through storytelling, primarily oral storytelling, that explained what they believed in and who they believed in. So what I wanted to do is go back and find the psychological motifs that underlie that, because those grow out of a popularism, and to say that not all, but a majority of people, boys, have a certain psychological relationship with their fathers. And that's been going on through history, and trying to explain that to say, we know your darkest secret.
Yeah.
And therefore, you're part of us, because we all know the same things. We know what you're thinking about your mother. We know what you think about your brother. We know what you think about your father, really.
Yeah.
And those are the things that make people say, hey, this is why we believe this stuff. And again, the crudest part of that, in terms of the religious, spiritual thing, is some people have taken those ideas and then distorted them, and you end up in a cult where they're using the psychological tools to make you adhere to their society, and part of it is they have to keep it closed.
And to them.
And to them, but it's the same thing. I mean, and again, you go through history, and even though in most cases you had open societies, but they really weren't, because let's face it, you were going to get killed if you go outside the wall. So let's build a wall around the whole thing so we can defend ourselves. So they were self-fulfilling, isolated human events.
Because you have worn all these hats, though, filmmaker, director, storyteller, writer, technological innovator, what do you want the first line of your obituary to say?
I was a great dad. Or I tried.
But do you consider yourself any of those things first? Writer, storyteller, filmmaker, problem solver?
First is dad. I mean, I gave up directing in order to become a dad. For 15 years, directing. I just ran a company and was an innovator, but it was not doing what I really like to do, which is actually make movies.
Because you wanted to be a dad?
Because, yeah, it was one of those things where you don't expect it to happen. But once I was a dad, it was like a bolt of lightning struck me. And I ended up getting divorced around that time. And I just decided, well, I think I'm just going to take care of my daughter, because that seems like the right thing to do. you know, I made these, it was right after Return of the Jedi. I said I made all these movies, and I'm not going to escape Star Wars. And my central concern was my daughter, so I just said, I'm going to raise my daughter, and then I adopted another daughter, and then adopted another son, and it wasn't until like 15 years later that I actually said, okay, I'm going to go back now and make direct movies again. So it was very much, and it's in the meantime, I had developed a lot of technology to do things that I could not do when I was doing Star Wars. Because in Star Wars, because it's a science fiction film, it's a fantasy film, it pushes the limit, the technological limits of the medium. Science fiction, fantasy, those sorts of things. You really, there's many things can't be done, they just can't. And there's an equation ultimately, which is how popular is something, how much does it cost? And they subtract one for the other and decide whether they're going to do it or not. So a lot of the films, when I was doing Star Wars, right after Star Wars, they didn't have room for spectacular. They only had room for, street movies. So, which is what I'd been doing before that. And so doing something that was sort of, an epic, a historical piece, science fiction, fantasy, any of those things, you just couldn't do it because they cost too much money. And technically, you couldn't accomplish it.
Kennedy Center honoree, that's a big deal. What does it mean to you?
Well, I could be glib.
No, just be real. I'm sitting here with a guy who's the happiest he's probably ever been. Married, 2-year-old daughter, all the money he'll ever need, sitting in this remarkable place where you live. So you got everything. But here is a saying that you are really one of America's finest artists. What does that mean to you that these people are going to honor you sitting next to the president at the Kennedy Center?
Well,
Don't be glib, be real.
well, I will be real. I'm not much into awards. It doesn't mean that much to me because I've gone through this, and I know it's just a group of people get together and say, we're going to give you this award. And a lot of them, it's just basically you're there to draw eyeballs.
Yeah, but there are awards and there are awards, and I've got to believe that this means something to you.
Well, it does mean something to me.
What is it?
I don't know. It's, again, I've got the Medal of Arts, I've got the Medal of Technology, I've got the...
So it's just
I've got
another
the
award,
Smithson.
what the hell? You just give him another award. He'll show up if you want him to, but he doesn't care.
Well, yeah, it's, I know it's about the TV show. It's not about me.
This is not a big TV show. The
Well, it
Kennedy
is a
Center
TV show.
Honors as a television show doesn't do very well and shown in the middle of December.
I know.
So it's not about a TV show. It's not the Oscars. This is in Washington, where all of Washington turns out. And it, in fact, selects only 5 people each year. And it's not based on what you've done that year or one movie.
I know.
It's based on what you have achieved in your career.
Right.
And all of a sudden,
But-
and you're putting you up in a pantheon of people that you really admire, like
Yeah.
your friend Steven Spielberg, okay?
We give each other awards all the time. Francis and I give awards to each other all the time. We're in a group, obviously, Marty and I do the same thing, where we all happen to be, and you got to remember,
Yes.
I hate to say this, but there are thousands of award shows every year. So, I'll take a couple of the ones that are meaningful to me, like the Kennedy Center Honors. Those are the ones that I will participate in, but I get a lot of other ones.
Is there a competition at all between you and Steven?
Sure.
What is it?
Who can do the better work?
And how do you compare?
And it's not better work in terms of, it's the oh wow factor. If I can do something and Steve says, oh wow, then I won. And he makes 10 times more movies than I do, so I have to say oh wow a lot more than he does. But I don't resent how many times. It's just that I enjoy the fact that I can see a movie and he can kind of one-up me and do something that I said, gee, that's unbelievable.
Well, let me tell you what he says about you. American Graffiti is one of the best films ever made.
Yeah, but that's very easy to say.
Because of what it was?
No, because he went, wow.
Because he went, wow. And why did he go wow over American Graffiti?
Well, because it was so different and exuberant. And,
Okay, go ahead. What else?
and had a lot of underpinnings of the kinds of things that a filmmaker wants to have in their movie, a lot of observations and sort of philosophical musings. And it was in the guise of an entertainment film. So most people didn't pay attention to any of that stuff. But they knew it. They knew it immediately. You know, it's very, again, critics have a tendency to be extremely glib. And they have to look at a movie a day or 2 movies a day, and they just rattle off in an hour what their feelings are about it. As a result, you get a very surfacey kind of point of view, or an ideological
Okay,
point
I'm
of
asking
view.
the filmmaker. I'm not asking critics about this film.
Filmmakers, I know how to make movies. I went to film school. I have a knack for it. I studied it very well and practiced, and I know what I'm doing. A lot of filmmakers try, but on the technical, telling a story, how you put a story together, how you make it effective emotionally, I know how to do that. And part of it is I have a talent for it. Part of it is I've worked hard to create and figure out how to do it. And I'm reasonably effective at it. I've made a lot of movies, as I tell people. I've produced more movies that were failures than successes. As a director, most of my films have been big successes, except for one. So, and a couple of ones I've produced have been huge successes, but most of them haven't been. But I know that going in. I know what's going to work and what's not going to work. But I do like movies. I love movies. And I know a lot of movies aren't popular. And you can say that going in. One of the reasons I retired is so I could make movies that aren't popular. Because in the world we live in the system we've created for ourselves in terms of, it's a big industry, you cannot lose money. So the point is that you're forced to make a particular kind of movie. And I used to say this all the time when people, back when Russia was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And they'd say, oh, but aren't you so glad that you're in America? I said, well, I know a lot of Russian filmmakers. They have a lot more freedom than I have. All they have to do is be careful about criticizing the government. Otherwise, they can do anything they want.
And so what do you have to do?
You have to adhere to a very narrow line of commercialism. And there's only certain, look, when I started in the 70s, it was like this. I could say Russia was like this, but we were like this. You could do a certain kind of movie. And I flaunted that system. I mean, THX, my first film, is definitely not an American film, and I shoved it in sideways. Francis helped me trick the studio.
Yeah, right.
They would have never let me make that movie if they knew what I was doing.
Could George Lucas be George Lucas because early on he owned the rights to make Star Wars?
Well,
You negotiated that coming out of the first film, yes?
Look, the difference
and therefore it made you very rich and made you very independent. So you didn't have to make movies because you had independence, and you had also built a great business.
Right. Well,
in addition to making films. So therefore you could preach to anybody you wanted to preach to because you weren't dependent on anybody.
Well, the issue is ultimately the reality of it, which is I'm in a unique blend of a practical person, pragmatic person, and a fantasy, completely daydreaming, guy who's not very practical at all. So,
And you combine those two.
well, I didn't, but the DNA, or we can say whatever force was at work there.
To create. Whoever created George Lucas gave him those two skills.
Yes, and they're the opposites.
Yeah.
One of them is and I've always been that way. Francis, when we started Zoetrope and started making movies, Francis was very much, and it was odd because when we started, he was a Hollywood director.
Right.
And I was this crazy kid doing art films. And I said, I'm never going to go into the theatrical film business. I only want to do art films. I'm going to do documentary films. Documentaries, cinema verite, that sort of thing was just coming in. And I said, this is what I'm doing. I'm excited. My ambition then was ultimately to be Michael Moore. And
A documentary filmmaker?
yeah. And, and cause trouble. Because that's what again, I grew up in the 60s. I'm a 60s kind of guy. I always have been. Yeah. And, I grew up in San Francisco, Bay Area. And, that was my environment that I grew up in, and I was perfectly happy to do it. I did not want to make theatrical films. I was making kind of tone poems in school. I was winning awards. Francis and I moved to San Francisco because neither one of us liked the Hollywood environment. We started a company up here, and I got to take one of my student films and turn it into a feature, it was
THX.
But it was a tone poem. It was just a visual storytelling. The characters and the plot were not as important as the metaphor and the symbolism. And as a result, and the emotional connection between the moving image and the audience. So I did that, and obviously our company went bankrupt and I destroyed everything. But there's always a silver lining. It caused him to be forced to pay off the debts, which meant he had to go do The Godfather. He challenged me as he was walking out the door. He says, stop doing this artsy-fartsy stuff.
Yeah.
Make a movie, make a comedy. I dare you to make a comedy. And I said, well, I can do that.
Yes.
That's no big deal. I can do anything. I'm in my 20s.
I'm George Lucas.
No, it's not. It has nothing to do with George
No,
Lucas. It has to do with I'm 23. I can do anything. That's when you think it. By the time 30, you get that beaten out of you. But when you're young, you sort of think you can do anything. And so I did it. And that was successful, and that started me on a whole different train to do, again, when I started Star Wars, I certainly didn't think it was going to be a hit. I didn't think American Graffiti was going to be a hit. I had no idea. In the beginning, American Graffiti the studio hated the film so much they shelved it. And they said, we're not going to even release this. Maybe we're going to see if we can release it as a movie of the week. But we can't release it in theaters. It's not that good. So that's where I was, and then I started working on Star Wars. And I was just doing it because I needed a job to pay, to eat. And I wanted to do this kind of experimental-ish, in my mind, idea about mythology and take the films that I loved when I was young, which was Republic serials, and transform, the kind of movie I wanted to make into a very popular genre. And out of that came both Indiana Jones and Star Wars. But, I thought that was my last movie of this thing. Then I was going to go back to doing what I really wanted to do. And I said, at least at the end, I want to have done a old-fashioned movie, on sound stages with makeup people and, sets and,
Yeah.
do the thing, make one of those movies before I'm kicked out. And, the fluke of American Graffiti becoming a hit was like, oh my God, now what? But I guess that'll be the only time that'll ever happen. So I got a hit. So I'll make this movie, which probably won't be a hit, but
Star Wars.
Yeah, Star Wars. But, when you describe Star Wars, you say it's a space opera. It's not a science fiction film. We have large dogs flying spaceships, and, you describe it, and people will say, oh, dear, this guy's off,
He's in his own world.
And of course, most of my friends are of where I was persuasion. I was further into the art world than they were, but I threw that all away after American Graffiti. I mean, Graffiti was, again, nobody expected me to do a comedy based on THX.
Yes.
So I said, and I'm not that funny a guy in real life.
I'll show Francis I can do a comedy.
I'll show those guys.
Yes.
But then when I started to go into Star Wars, they said, why are you making a children's film? I said, well, because I think I can have more of an influence on people. And I think I can have things to say that I can actually influence kids, adolescents, 12-year-olds. and you know, they're trying to make their way into the bigger world, and that's basically what mythology was to say, I'm saying, this is what we believe in, these are our rules, this is what we are as a society. And we don't do that. The last time we were doing that was Westerns. And of course, this was in the 70s, and the Westerns sort of fiddled out in the 50s. So it was like we didn't have any national mythology. So I said, I'm going to try this and see if it works. And I'm just doing it, you know. And it'd be fun because, you know, I like spaceships, I like adventure, I like fun, I like all this stuff. So I'll do it. But I figured that would be the last. I'll do it, I'll have done my thing. Then I got in trouble because the script got out too long, and then I had 3 scripts instead of 1 script, and then I had to try to get them all finished. And, you know, I got hooked into this tar baby, and I couldn't get out. And it was a while before I finally realized that no matter what happens, I'm never going to get out. I'm always going to be George Star Wars Lucas, no matter how hard I try to be something else.